This is your host, Shashank Shekhar, and welcome to another episode of Shashank Redemption. Okay, welcome to another episode of Shashank Redemption. I'm your host, Shashank Shekhar, and today I'm joined by someone super special and also the youngest that I've ever had on my show. She's all of 17 years. She's, I think, a junior in high school. And what's crazy is that even at that age, she's already founded and started a company and published a book. And not just published a book, it's actually a bestseller. So let's hear it from Anishka Verma. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I was, as I was talking and introducing you, Anishka, it's astonishing to think that at this age, when did you actually publish the book? How long ago was that?
I believe, I don't remember exactly, but it's somewhere between the ages 15 and 16.
So about a year back is when you published it.
Yeah, give or take.
And I personally, I don't think I know of anyone, at least personally. I'm sure there are lots of kids out there who have probably published a book at that age. Maybe not a lot, because that'll be a little bit of exaggeration. But it's incredible that you've done that. Now talk to me about the process of writing. Is because of course I have published books in the past, but a lot of people that I meet, one of the first questions that I get asked is, how did you publish a book? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of writer's block. It's about, what do I write about? How do I get the discipline to write all of this? These are all these questions that people have. And by the way, a lot of my listeners on this podcast are entrepreneurs, and they will, I guess, benefit immensely from the answer to that question, is because I'm sure a lot of them have similar questions around writing a book. So talk us through the process of, why did you decide to write it? How did the process look like? What kind of challenges did you face?
So the deciding to write a book, honestly, it was just a bit natural for me. Writing and reading have both been very big hobbies of mine. Ever since I was a kid, two things I was very interested in. So it's only natural that as I grew older, writing a book was something that I would have. But it is hard. It is quite hard. The process of it really went that one thing that I highly recommend that I think is extremely important is that you need to plan out your book, because even through going through writer's block or you're going to a burnout stage, one thing that'll keep you committed to your book is that if you have it planned out. Because once you have all your ideas somewhat laid out, it's very easy to just stem stuff off of it. It's a lot easier to write in general. But talking about challenges that I faced, it's a lot to write. It's a lot to write a book. And previously, I think the longest I'd written were maybe like 20, 30 page things. And writing something, I think this book is around 160 pages. Writing something of this caliber takes a lot of discipline. So oftentimes I found myself almost forcing myself to write, because I knew that if I let it go and I didn't write at all, then I just would not have the project completed.
Makes sense. And the book, by the way, is called How to Become a Better Writer, and it's available on Amazon.com, right?
It is available on Amazon.
Perfect. So, of course, as you listen to Anishka's story, especially about the book and some of her writing techniques, if that's something of interest to you, then go and grab a copy on Amazon. But let's change the track here and talk about your company. It's interesting that I'm talking to a 17-year-old and not just talking to her about the book she wrote, but I'm also talking to her about a company she found, which is, I interview a lot of entrepreneurs on this show, and we usually just talk about their companies, is because it's very rare for people to be a writer and an entrepreneur at the same time. So the company is called Writing Bud, right?
Yes.
So tell us more. What does the company do?
So Writing Bud was something that stemmed off of my book, really. And we do two main things. It's one part of it is consulting and teaching, and the other part of it is a nonprofit project that I'll get into in a minute.
Okay.
But as for the consulting and teaching, it's basically just tutoring. It's open to anyone, regardless of age. Although I'm more looking for like late elementary school, middle school type children, because that's really when you start getting more committed to writing. So currently I am consulting. I think she's around 11 years old. And I'm helping her write her first book.
Wow, at 11.
At 11, right?
That's
so
amazing.
it's a lot of young talents out there that I'm trying to help. But the nonprofit mission. So this is something that's actually very close to me just because I put a lot of time into this. And the gist of it is that it is a very big tutoring project. We're trying to help out kids in Africa, specifically more underprivileged kids in Africa that don't really have these types of opportunities. And what I've done is that I've created a way to tutor them on English writing, just English in general, so that they could have better opportunities in the future in terms of jobs and stuff like that. And the entire thing is completely nonprofit, so it's free for them to do everything. It's a lot, but it's something very close to me, very personal.
So let's get into more specifics, because I'm not sure if I understand what you're trying to do. So you're trying to help students in Africa become a better writer. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that is what I'm trying to do. Yes.
And are they supposed to be buying your book to do this? Are you sending them free books? Like, what's the process for them to learn about all of this?
Yeah. So one thing that I have done and one thing that I do recommend is incorporating your earlier projects into your newer ones. And what exactly do I mean by this is that the foundation of this project that we're having in Africa is a curriculum that I've created, a curriculum that these kids can follow and how the entire project is based off of. And this curriculum is largely off of my book. It's me reformatting my book, making the language easier so they can understand, making it a lot smaller. So I'm not just handing them a 160-page book and telling them to go through it.
Okay.
So that is the main part of it. And it's breaking that curriculum down to different types of resources. So for example, if internet is available to them, I have videos that I've created that they can use to help learn. But if internet is not available, I do have like PDF copies, etc., of the actual curriculum itself that I've slightly modified so that it's more of me teaching them. So it mimics the videos without them needing the internet access.
That's very cool. And it also kind of shows that even though, I mean, of course, you don't live in Africa, but you understand your audience, is because you're right. I mean, I would think that a lot of them may not have the same kind of bandwidth to be running videos, for example. And so you've given them an alternative or an alternate option to just kind of read through PDF, which is, of course, much easier to download and read even with a smaller bandwidth of internet. So is there any goal that you have with this? Are you going to a certain country in Africa? Is there a certain number that you have in mind? What kind of impact do you want to make with this project of teaching more African kids how to become a better writer, or simply how to become better with English?
Yeah, so the end goal of this mission is that I'm hoping to help around 10,000 of these students.
10,000?
10,000, yes.
Not 10 or 10,000.
No, 10,000. 10,000.
Wow, that's quite a lofty goal. And I'm assuming there are other people helping you out with that, because, I mean, you don't even have any physical presence in Africa. You're doing all of this virtually. So yeah, I'm assuming it's the entire village, so to say, is coming together to help you with a project like this.
Of course. I think one thing that's very important to remember, especially in big projects like this, is that it's very hard to do things alone. And in something like this, I can't do it alone, right? I don't live in Africa. I don't personally know people in Africa. It's just not something I can do by myself. So what I've been doing is that I've been reaching out to people who I know are there and can help me with this. I've been pitching them, my idea for the project, seeing if they can help. And If they can help, then I brief them on it. I'm like, hey, this is what I need you to do. Can you do it for me? All that stuff. So collaboration and communication are two very important things when running a big project like this.
And when you do it for not for profit, of course, there are many more people who are willing to join you because they see that you're doing it for altruistic reason and not really to make money out of it.
Yeah, precisely so. Yep.
Okay, very cool. So now I have read your book cover to cover. Huge fan, by the way.
Thank you.
And I have, as you know, I have built a huge amount of my personal branding through writing. I used to blog in 2009, or I started blogging in 2009 when very few people in the industry were blogging. And I have learned a lot from the book itself. Things that I shouldn't say I wasn't aware of, but was reminded of again when I read your book. I was especially quite blown away by a chapter called 3 Principles of Writing, which are the 3 pillars you were advising on, which practically everybody's writing should sit on top of that. And by the way, everyone listening to this podcast, understand that everything that Anishka has written in that book, or almost everything, applies to any writer, really. You're a business writer who writes emails or blogs. You are just a student. You want to get better at English. You just want to get better at writing. Really, whatever you need be, because even though she wrote it for middle and high school students, as I said, I've found it hugely beneficial for my writing as well. So why don't you go ahead and elaborate those 3 principles of writing? What are those, and how can someone, irrespective of what level of writing they are in right now, they can benefit from those 3 principles of writing?
Yeah, no, of course. So the 3 principles of writing, at least the way that I see it, are simplicity, clarity, and elegance.
Okay.
And I've put it in that order specifically because they all stem off of each other, and I'll explain this just in a bit. So simplicity is really the first thing, and it's just putting, it's making your sentences shorter and easier to understand.
Okay.
So what exactly do I mean like this? Oftentimes, especially for people who want to be better writers, or like their definition of better writing is just simply longer sentences. So you'll have sentences that are grammatically correct, but it's just a whole bunch of different clauses and ideas just thrown all together, and it's all pieced together with like commas or semicolons. And just because something is grammatically correct doesn't mean it's the best way to put it, right?
Absolutely.
So the main thing with simplicity is really breaking down those larger sentences into smaller, more digestible bits so that your reader can take it in better.
Okay. How about clarity?
So clarity stems off of simplicity. So after simplicity, you have your nice shorter sentences all looking good and stuff. That's where clarity comes in. Clarity is revising those shorter sentences that you had from simplicity further, and it's removing things that simply don't make sense. So what do I mean by removing things that simply don't make sense? For example, you can have a simile that doesn't make sense, right? So the example that I have in the book is walking as slowly as a cheetah. Huh. It's weird. Yes. It's weird. It doesn't make sense because, to us, the entire point of a cheetah is that it's a fast animal, right? It's the fastest mammal, whatever. So saying that something is walking as slowly as a cheetah just causes your reader to be confused, right? There's nothing to it that makes sense. So really a big part of clarity will be removing those things that are just not making any sense or going to confuse your reader, just getting rid of it entirely. And elegance is the last principle of writing, and elegance comes after simplicity, clarity, everything is the very last thing. And this is because elegance is something that's not as concrete because it has to do with the way your writing flows. And the flow that a writer has is something very personal and very individual. Every writer will have its own type of flow. That's just how it works. But it's also something that comes largely out of experience. But something that I have written in the book that's very important is that just because a lot of people attribute flow to experience doesn't mean that there aren't ways to improve it besides just writing more in general. So the biggest way that you can make writing sound more elegant would be using something like similes and metaphors, right? Where these similes and metaphors are useful because they compare things, but they don't do it in a literal sense. And it's a bit more of a poetic type of way, really, especially metaphors. Metaphors are seen as more poetic.
Makes sense. Now, interesting, when you were explaining the simplicity, clarity, and elegance, something in my head said that I do a lot of those things even in my speaking. So there's it's crazy that how much of this transfer of a skill happens between writing and speaking is because if you're writing something really well, you are probably crafting a good story to tell even when you're speaking. So, and that's a lesson for the audience here, is that you can use those three principles even if you're not a writer, probably never want to be a writer. But simplicity, clarity, elegance principle can be equally used in the same powerful manner, even if you're speaking. So if you craft your speeches in a manner where it's simple, it's clear, and it's elegant, your audience is going to love you for that. So very well said on that one. Now, one more skill that I would like to really dive a little deeper into, something which is closer to my heart when it comes to writing, is that, and something that I see most of the writers have struggled with, is editing. Even some of very popular writers, and I would not take names on the podcast here, but I have read novels and books from very, very famous writers, and like 20 minutes in, I'm like, okay, where does the story start? Like, what's going to happen? And the skill that I'm talking about is editing. One of my favorite quote when it comes to editing, and coincidentally, you have mentioned that quote in the book as well, is from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who says, "Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away."
Beautiful.
Now, that's editing, right? Is that you've written something so perfectly, in such perfection that if someone were to take out two sentences from it, it will not end with the same kind of meaning that it will. And that's what editing is. And I see, especially in my role as CEO and talking to other people, a ton of emails where they will send something in, I don't know, like it takes me 10 minutes to read, and it could have been done in 3 sentences, because editing is a problem, whether you're writing a book, a blog, and an email. So talk to us about, how can someone get better at editing? What are the things that they should discount? How do they make a writing which is succinct, which is to the point, but it still has the elegance, clarity, and simplicity that you talked about? Give us a couple of tips to our audience here.
Yeah, of course. So one thing that I believe I mentioned earlier was structure.
Okay.
So as I said, it's very important when you're writing something to just organize what you're going to be writing and having a structure to it. There are a couple of things where it's very easy to have a structure because it's just sort of a base thing of writing. Like, for example, if you're writing a fictional story, and I do mention in the book, is that there's a very basic story arc type of deal that we have for fictional writing. And that's just sort of your base structure that you would work off of. But let's say you're not writing fiction writing, right? Then you have to have a way to organize your thoughts. And what I was saying earlier in structure is that it's very, very important for not just writing whatever you're writing and getting it done and organizing your thoughts, but in something like editing, it helps you make sure that you're still following whatever thoughts and ideas that you had. Because oftentimes when you sit down and you start writing, you can just keep going and you start going off topic. So structure is very important because it keeps you there. But a couple of other things, and really this is what I think is the most important thing when it comes to editing, is being familiar with grammar. Grammar is huge. I've written a lot of explaining grammatical errors, explaining grammatical rules in my book because it's just such an essential part of writing. And honestly, what I'd recommend is being familiar with grammatical rules and common grammatical errors, right? Which is why I've written it so much in the book, is that once you become familiar about these things, it's so much easier to edit because you can see those things easily and you can review it. The last thing that I feel like is extremely important when editing is decluttering the writing. And this sort of goes back to what I was saying with the simplicity, clarity, elegance thing, is that you need to tidy up your writing and you need to cut through, as I like to say. You need to get rid of things that aren't important and you need to make whatever is important more concise and clear so it's more digestible to your reader. And a couple of other things is adding some material. Oftentimes after a heavy edit, you'll find yourself with, oh, wow, I had a whole page and now it's like 2 paragraphs, right? So sometimes it's after all of this, you just don't have enough. So it's just writing a bit more and adding to it.
Makes sense. Now, we're down to the last 3-4 minutes here, Anishka, and there are a couple of questions from an entrepreneurship angle that I wanted to ask you. So most people think that writing a book or starting a business while doing a full-time job is hard, right? Either they think, let me just get into a business, start a business, or be in a full-time job. Trying to do both, they think is highly unrealistic, or it's a lot of pressure, something that they don't want to go through. Now, you wrote this book while you were a full-time student. You were, of course, still a full-time student.
Yes, I am.
And so from an organization structure, from an entrepreneurship angle, what are some of the lessons that people can learn from the fact that, look, it is possible. You can be doing full-time something else. You could have a full-time corporate career. You could be doing, in your case, as I said, you are a full-time student, but you still were able to get some time and write the book and start on a business and thinking of this hugely ambitious project that you earlier mentioned about helping 10,000 African students to become a better writer. So doing all of this, what are some of the lessons that you learned that people can learn from, or any advice that you have for people who have something full-time and who want to do something else but don't think they have the time to do it?
Yeah, no, of course. One thing that I would like to say straight up is that it is very hard. I'm not meaning to drive anyone away from it, but to do something like this while you're still doing full-time something else, it's very hard. You need to have a lot of commitment to whatever you're trying to do. But if you have that commitment and if you're there to work through it, it is completely possible. One thing that helped me a lot was really just organization, because you have to break down how much time you're going to give to this project of yours and doing that at the same time of whatever else that you're doing full time. One thing that I would recommend is that maybe whatever project you're having, you can start during a break. For example, my book, I did start properly writing it during summer break. Just because when you have a little bit of a break and from whatever you're doing full time, you can devote some more time in the beginning to whatever project that you want to have.
Yeah, and that's so well said. You mentioned about organizing. You mentioned about the fact that you should have a strong commitment to something. But the last point that you mentioned is very interesting, is because it brings to me the memory of me finishing my last book, which was my first home. I had been working on that book, I think, for 2 years. And it was during the Christmas break and the winter vacation and all of that, when I was kind of very slow on work for a couple of weeks. That's where I finished the last 60-70% of the book, because I could just power through that. So that's a great idea, is that if you get a small break, a short break here and there, use that time wisely to get started on a project that you thought was not possible with your full-time work, whatever else that you were doing. Because once you get that momentum, that you can just use that momentum to finish the project. Now, I'm sure my audience is very intrigued about everything that you have done at such a young age. Extremely commendable. And they might want to connect with you or learn more about you. Where can they find, or what's the best way for them to reach out to you? Because I don't think you have a LinkedIn or a Facebook profile. Where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the best place that you can find me, if you want to reach out to me, if you just want to know more about what I've done, is my website, anishkaverma.com. That's ANISHKAVRMA.com.
Perfect. So that, ladies and gentlemen, was Anishka Verma. As I mentioned before, she is best-selling author, founder of the company called Writing Bud. And by the way, a couple of information that I missed earlier in the introduction is that her book is not just a bestseller; it has won awards at several book festivals, and she was featured by Kidpreneur.com as one of the youngest kidpreneur, as they call it, a kid entrepreneur. But hopefully, a lot of you, I'm sure, you're much older than Anishka is, but you could learn from her story. I mean, all of this does not just apply to teenagers here; it applies to us as grown-up entrepreneurs. And a lot of things that she mentioned about organization, about structuring, about how to become a better writer, how to start a company while doing something full-time is a learning for all of us. So thank you so much, Anishka, for being on the show.
Of course. It's a pleasure.
And with that, we have come to the end of another episode of Shashank Redemption. Stay tuned for the next episode, but thank you for tuning in.